Triangle congruence theorems. The first theorem is side, side, side congruency. If three sides of one triangle are congruent to the corresponding sides of the other, then the triangles are congruent. Side angle side. If two sides and the included angle of one triangle are congruent to two sides and the included angle of the other triangle, the triangles are congruent. Angle side angle. If two angles and the included side of one triangle are congruent to two angles and the included side of the other triangle, then the triangles are congruent. Angle angle side. If two triangles and the non-included side of one triangle are congruent to two angles and the non-included side of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. And lastly, hypotenuse leg. If two right triangles have a congruent hypotenuse and a corresponding congruent leg, then the triangles are congruent. All right, now let's move on to our examples. Here's our first example. We need to figure out if these triangles are congruent, and if so, what triangle congruence theorem says that they are congruent. So as I look at this, I'm just going to label what I see. Looking right here, is this a congruent side or angle? This is a side, and here is this other side. This is a side, and this is a side. Now, we also have additional information here. Do we see these angles right here? These are vertical angles, and if we remember from our very first lesson, vertical angles are congruent. So I'm going to draw angle arcs here to show that these angles are congruent, and of course, since they're angles, we can label them with an A. The reason we're labeling is because it helps to identify the actual congruence theorem. So we'll do one triangle at a time. So as I look at this triangle and I kind of read in order, S, A, S. And I also check the other triangle, S, A, S. Now, since both of those triangles read S, A, S, these two triangles are congruent by the side angle side congruence theorem. Example 2, again, the first thing you do is label. Here we have a side, here we have a side, here we have an angle, here we have an angle. And again, we have vertical angles again, so we're going to draw our arc. And then also label these with angles because those are angles. So when I begin to read this, I can say side, angle, angle. But as I think back to my congruence theorems, I didn't have any congruence theorem that said side, angle, angle. So let's try to read it the other way. Angle, angle, side. Now we did have one that said angle, angle, side. So let's just check our other triangle. Angle, angle, side. So yes, these two triangles are congruent by the angle, angle, side congruence theorem. Example 3. We have a side, a side, a side, a side. Now, do we see we have two triangles that are sharing a side? If these two triangles are sharing a side, then of course the length of their sides are congruent. So we can draw a tick mark here to show that this side of this triangle is congruent to this side of this triangle. And we can then also label. So as I look at this, I see I have side, side, side for this triangle and side, side, side for this triangle. So those two triangles are congruent by the side, side, side triangle congruence theorem. Example 4. So go ahead and label. We got a side, we got a side, we got a side, we got a side. We have vertical angles here. So we're going to label this angle. We're going to label this angle. Now, as I read this one on the bottom, I can see that it says side, angle, side. So now we have to check the top. Side, side, angle. Now, this is not one of our congruence theorems. Now, some of you may look at this and say, well, why didn't you just read it this way and say side, angle, side? But do you see, if we tried to read it this way, we're skipping over this entire angle. When you read your statements, you should not miss anything. So see how we went straight from this side to the next side to the angle? Here, we're skipping over an entire angle, so we can't read it that way. So this one says side, angle, side. This one says side, side, angle, or angle, side, side. Because they don't say the same thing, these triangles are not congruent. Example 5. Again, label. We got an angle, side, side, angle. And here we have vertical angles. So here's an angle and an angle. So as I read this, I see I have angle, side, angle. Check the second triangle, angle, side, angle. They both say ASA, so these two triangles are congruent by the angle, side, angle triangle congruence theorem. And then lastly, example 6. So we can go ahead and label. We see our sides. These are vertical angles. So if this is a right triangle, if this is a right angle, this is also a right angle. So as I try to read this, I see ASS or SSA, SSA or ASS, but this is not one of our theorems. We don't have a theorem that says SSA or ASS. So, but before I decide to mark this not congruent, because I see we have a right angle, I need to check to see if it's hypotenuse leg. So let me go ahead and erase this. Uh-oh. It's not letting me erase. All right, let me just do it manually. Okay, so now that we see that that didn't work, we're going to backtrack. So again, we know that if this one is a right angle, this is also a right angle. Now let's check to see if the hypotenuses are congruent. So the hypotenuse is the side that is across from the right angle. Here's our right angle. This is across from the right angle, so this is our hypotenuse. And this is our hypotenuse over here. So are the two hypotenuses congruent? Yes, they are. So I'm just going to label that hypotenuse because you see they both have 2 tick marks. And then are one of the legs congruent? So we have a leg here and a leg here, and they are congruent. They have 1 tick mark. So yes, we would say that these 2 triangles are congruent by the hypotenuse leg triangle congruence theorem.